So I'm Justine. Are any of you guys Litmus customers by chance? Cool. All right. Well, I work for a company called Litmus. We're a software company based in Boston. We do design testing and email analytics. So kind of like a companion tool to whatever ESP you're using or whatever ESP that HighRoad might be using on your behalf. And I've been doing this email thing for like 9 years now, which is longer than I really want to admit. But as a result of that, I tend to know more than, again, I care to admit about email design and best practices. So that's me. I used to work at ExactTarget, which doesn't actually exist anymore, right? They recently went away and became the Salesforce Marketing Cloud. I am from Indianapolis, Midwest born and bred, so I don't always get this East Coast thing. Sometimes I feel like I moved to a different country. I heard a woohoo. Who else is from the Midwest? Nice. I'm going to be there in like 3 weeks. Or near Minneapolis. Savage? Who names their town Savage? Is it full of savages? All right. Cool. And if you're going to be around tomorrow, which I expect many of you are, you will learn very quickly that I love email. So I'm Melodori. Litmus is Litmus app on Twitter. And then we have about an hour and a half to cover a lot of content. And then I think maybe a half dozen or so of you also submitted emails to do a live review of later, which is always fun. So the goal of that is to have all of you, and maybe even the people online, if they can participate on Twitter, that type of thing, take everything you've learned and then help improve these campaigns that were sent as part of the survey. So that's fun and exciting as well. So yeah, I already talked about Litmus. That's our site. And I'm just always start off with this sort of quip, which is, have you heard email is dead? Haha, right? It's full of zombies. But really it's not, right? I think most of you probably know, we talked a lot about email this morning, that email is definitely not dead, right? It's very alive and well and making a lot of business for our businesses. But the truth of the matter is every email needs to have a purpose. So earlier Jenny was talking about the 5 C's of like a content strategy. I'm actually going to talk to you about the 5 W's. So when you leave here, you can have 10 things to talk about, 5 C's and 5 W's. And so the 5 W's are, basically I borrowed them from the journalism world. When they tell every journalist when they're writing a story to ask who, what, when, where, why, and then of course there's how. So there's a bonus letter in there, the H for those of you that are wondering. And so it's, who are you sending to, right? Every email strategy needs to start with a foundation of this stuff. And you're like, well, wait, I thought you were going to talk about design, right? Well, design has to also start with a good strategy. So if you don't know who you're sending to, that's a lot of really basic stuff like audience, segmentation, or even just going back to knowing your audience and what they want to hear from you and what kind of content is going to most resonate with them. The W is, what do you want them to do? And that all boils down to your call to action. If you don't know what you're going to ask your subscribers to do when you send them that message, maybe you shouldn't be sending the email in the first place. And then when is it appropriate to send the message? This is not only just like a time of day or a day of week thing, and we can debate that all day long, which is what is the best time of day to send email. Someone's going to release a report that says Tuesday, everyone's going to send on Tuesday, then Tuesday's no longer going to be the best day to send, right? I'm talking about things like triggered, contextual, when. When is it the most appropriate time in your customer's life cycle to send them that message? So I'm talking about a more strategic kind of when, rather than like a time or day of a day or week kind of when. Also, where will the recipient read it? Jenny also talked about mobile. That's a really big deal. Knowing what kinds of devices and environments that your customers and subscribers like to read email is also a really important thing to consider in the beginning. It can also play into the more tactical aspect of the when, because if you know that you're sending an email in the morning and you have a higher mobile open rate in the morning, maybe it's better to send a more mobile-friendly campaign for that type of communication as well. Why are you sending this message? That goes back to the what as well. I need to know why I'm sending it so I have a purpose and I know what I'm asking them to do. And then lastly, how are you going to measure success? That's another really big one that I think we skip a lot of the time. We spend so much time and energy putting our souls into that body of the message and not really saying, you know, what is the overall purpose? How am I going to tell if this email is doing its job? And so here's some really common answers to those questions. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. You could be sending an internal email. You could be sending an external email. That's pretty common. I'm going to assume that most of you are in B2B because you're in the association land, but you never know. You might be sending an email to regular old consumers as well. And even in that sense, I think it's really important to note that the whole, there really is no such thing as B2B and B2C, right? They're different kinds of people, but they are people all the same. So you are still sending an email to a human that has an inbox. Keep in mind the demographics of that audience and, of course, knowing them really well. We talked about the when, how is it appropriate, when is it appropriate, all those why aspects. You could be sending an email to increase brand awareness. Maybe you're just doing it for content marketing to educate and inspire. The what, that's the call to action part. Are you registering for a webinar? Is there some sort of call to action here? Is it just reading? We already talked about the where, and then, of course, the how. There's much more to opens, clicks, and conversions. But I think there is a session after mine or later today that's going to talk about measurement stuff as well, so I won't go so far into that. And so it's always important to remind subscribers and yourself about all those 5 W's. And so actually at the bottom of most of Litmus's emails, we have this permission reminder. And it says, you're receiving this email because ... fill in the blank here. And that's a really good way for us to know why we're sending the email, but also a really good reminder to our subscribers. So if people are, maybe you have a really high spam complaint rate, reminding people at the bottom of the email why they're receiving it or putting that in context for them as to why they're receiving it can be helpful not only internally but externally as well. And so basically, if you don't have a plan and you don't have a purpose, maybe you shouldn't be sending an email in the first place, right? And of course, the where part has become a really complicated question, especially just in the last 6 months. It was complicated before when we had lots of different screen sizes, but now one of the most consistent mobile devices, basically of our time, the iPhone, now has 3 different screen sizes. It's become way more complicated than it ever has been in the past, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in depth later. But it is important to know that mobile email has increased by more than 400% since 2011. And so I've been giving talks like this for a while, since then, and I used to get up on stage and make a really big deal when mobile opens were 10%. I'd be like, guys, 10%, it's a lot of email mobile opens. And it's increased 400% since then. So that's not something we can't ignore anymore. And so what are some of the types of email that you should send? When you're thinking about strategy and you're thinking about how you can impact your customers more or add value to your organizations, there's lots and lots of different kinds of email communications that you can send. And here's just a handful that Litmus sends. So we send emails based on activities. And in your guys' case, a lot of your associations are probably paying you guys membership dues, right? And so you probably need a way to provide them with receipts. Well, guess what? Litmus does that too. So every time we are a monthly recurring subscription service, every time we charge your credit card, we send you this really beautiful invoice that's really a receipt. And there's a lot of really good information here too. So we have a lot of European customers that are concerned with things like VAT. There's a note in there for those European customers to explain to them how we handle VAT. There's also information about how to look at your prior receipts. So you can even turn something like a really simple and somewhat banal and boring receipt or invoice email into something really useful and helpful and even maybe engaging. You can put your brand on it. You can put it in the tone of voice for your subscribers, that kind of thing. Also, probably a lot of you have sites that people can log into, right, to access resources and that type of thing. Again, so does Litmus. Logins means things like passwords don't always work. So we have password reset emails. We even lock people out of their accounts if they've tried the same password or an incorrect password 3 or 5 times. So those are the kinds of emails that we can be sending that can be really branded and nice looking. And then we also have these activity-based emails. So when someone runs a test or an export is ready for download, we can say hey, your test is ready for download. So if you guys are doing white papers or ebooks or anything like that for your audiences as resources, sending them a download or an email that has a link to that download as well can be a helpful reminder and also can really keep that information top of mind in their inbox or searchable in a lot of cases so they can access it really easily. You can also send emails based upon lack of activity, which is a really powerful way to encourage your subscriber base and your customers to maybe do something that they otherwise aren't doing. So at Litmus, we do a little bit of churn analysis to see what kinds of activities people do or don't do right before they cancel. And so we can see that, for instance, we know that people that run at least 5 tests in Litmus are less likely to cancel their subscription. So the more we can get them in there and testing their emails, probably the less likely they are to cancel, at least in theory. So we could theoretically look at our database and say like, okay, who hasn't run a test in a while, and then send them an email maybe encouraging them to do so. Or in this case, we have like almost like an abandoned cart concept, which I think a lot of people think is like a retail thing, but it can work really well for B2B too. So if you have a subscription or an association sign up on your site, we collect the email address as the first thing, and then if people abandon that sign-up form, we've actually stored the email address temporarily, and if they haven't signed up in 24 hours, we send them an email that says, hey, can we help you set up your account? So a lot of these more B2C or like retail concepts that you hear about, abandoned cart, reactivation, that kind of thing, can also apply to like the B2B world. You just have to kind of think creatively about how you might want to do it. Or Litmus partner Customer.io has another thing where they have like a freemium model. And one of the ways that they help engage their customers and get them to come in and maybe pay is encouraging them to set up some more of the deliverability stuff on their end of the spectrum. So if they know that people haven't set that up yet, they also have data that says, hey, if people set this up, they're more likely to stick around and become a paying customer. So they're really encouraging people to do the types of behaviors that they've proven help them stick around. And of course, you want to roll out the welcome mat. I can't overemphasize the importance of a welcome email. I'm not going to beat this to death because many of you have probably heard it before. But also consider that you might need more than one kind of welcome email, which is actually what we do at Litmus. So you can get 2 different kinds of welcome emails. One if you sign up for our service, so you're testing your campaigns or whatever else, and it's like literally a walkthrough of how you can get started using Litmus. Or we also have like a content marketing based welcome email. So if you just sign up to read our newsletters, which is basically like a digest of all of our blog content, you get a different kind of newsletter welcome email. And what that welcome email for the newsletter is, it's actually, we refresh that like once every 6 months or so. We look at our most evergreen content, the most popular content that's getting the most traffic on our blog. And so this welcome email kind of acts like a best of resources. So it sets the expectation of the really kind of awesome content that you're going to get from our newsletters moving forward. And of course, there's lots of other different kinds of emails you can send to, right? That's one of our newsletters. We also send something called the email design newsletter. So if you're not creating a ton of your own content, don't be afraid to curate other people's content and send out a newsletter. That's really, really valuable for your audiences. If you know that there's other stuff going on in your industry that you think is going to be relatable to your audience, that's what we do here. So we have, it's an internal tool that actually just got made external called Curated. A Litmus friend, we sort of invested in their business, and you can submit articles into it and then create newsletters that you send out. So it's basically like I just bookmark. It's like a bookmarking tool. As you're reading cool stuff on the internet, you bookmark the links that you want, and you create a newsletter of it and send it out to your audience. And we've gotten a great response from that. People love it, and it's pretty low maintenance on our end, right? We just have to find the content and send out the email. Then we do a lot of like webinars, ebooks, white papers, that kind of stuff too. And so there's emails associated with those things. And of course, it's even beyond and above that, right? You can do lead nurturing drip campaigns. We do the email design conference. So we do event-based emails. Basically, the sky's the limit. There's lots and lots and lots of different kinds of emails you can be sending, especially follow-ups. Don't forget follow-ups. Those are really important, especially for membership activities. All right. So this is where we get into sort of the nitty-gritty of the design stuff. And when I say design, I don't really mean so much graphics and layout, because I'm going to guess that most of you really aren't day-to-day designers, right? But you have more impact and influence on design than you probably realize, or design touches more things than just graphics and layout, because design is really a good strategy. It's a good foundation. It's a good plan. A design doesn't have to be pretty things. And so I talk about this idea of a subscriber experience. And basically it goes all the way from the from name to the website or the landing page where you're asking your customer to convert. So many of us spend so much time when we create emails thinking about just the email, like the body, the thing that people look at when they open. And we tend to forget about all the other stuff that happens to subscribers when they're reading our emails. Especially when you consider that, like, what's your average open rate, Kim? Okay. How about Rachel?
28.
All right. So if 28 to 30% of your audience is opening your email, that means that only 28 to 30% of your audience is ever seeing the thing that you've so like slaved over. But theoretically, 100% of the people that you send to are going to see things like your from name and your subject line, right? So it really makes a lot of sense that we invest a little bit more time in those areas of our email rather than focusing just so much on the look and feel and the actual body of the email itself. So we're going to walk through that process, and I'm going to give you a whole lot of hopefully helpful tips about what to do with that kind of stuff. So the from name kind of is going to appear in a couple different ways, depending on if we're talking about desktop or mobile subscribers. On the desktop, you're going to see the from name come usually first, and it's also usually the most bold piece of content in the subscriber's inbox. Definitely the same thing on mobile. Pretty consistently across the board, it's going to be the from name that's the highest piece of hierarchy there as well. And so in both of those cases, it's really important to ask yourselves, what's going to be recognizable? What are my subscribers going to trust? And so you can kind of go a couple different ways here. You can have emails come from a person. You can have emails come from a brand, or you can kind of do a combination thereof, where you say like Justine Jordan, Litmus. Really, you need to test. I've heard tons. I was actually at a conference like 3 weeks ago where someone went on stage and was extolling the virtues of using first name employee names because they did this one test and it worked really well for them. And I was like, So you have to keep in mind that even if you read a case study online that says that something worked really well for one person, that might not work well for you. Even me personally, I know that some brands, like I have a rep there. I know that person really well. If I get an email from them in my inbox, I'm going to recognize their name and be more likely to open it. Other companies that like bought my email from some horrible list and they somehow got a hold of my first name and they send from their first name, I don't know who they are. I've never heard of them before, and I immediately think it's junk or spam, and I skip right over it. So that first name recognition can carry a lot of weight in both directions. It can be really positive or it can be really negative. So if you have sales reps or account managers or a face of your brand that your audience knows really well, feel free to use it or at least test it out. But otherwise, I would say that your brand name is probably the better way to go. Ask yourself, who do my subscribers have a relationship with? That's the really key piece there, is the relationship. So after that, we move on to, another key thing to remember about this from name is the from address. So you can have your brand name. In this case, it's MindMeister email. I love MindMeister. If you ever do mind maps, it's a cool service. But it broke my heart when I saw that they were sending emails from MindMeister, but if I wanted to reply to that email, it goes to noreply@mindmeister.com. So that is like it's like you knocking on someone's door, them opening it, and then slamming it right back in your face. Seriously, it's like saying, I sent you this email, I'm in your home, I'm in your inbox, but don't reply to me, don't talk back. Because email is a communication medium, right? You send emails back and forth, you reply to emails, that's how you get stuff done. So don't send emails from no reply. Find a way to monitor that inbox, send it to your support team, do whatever you need to do to make sure that those emails don't come from no reply. All right, the second thing is the subject. Again, tons and tons and tons of advice out on the interwebs about how to write a great subject line. Really, you're going to have to test the crap out of this. Probably every email that Litmus sends, we do a subject line test. And only maybe 1 out of every 8 tests do we actually learn something. More often than not, it is a dead even split about which of our subject lines performs better. And that can be really frustrating, but over time you gradually learn. So you have to get really creative about your subject line testing and always have a hypothesis every time to say, what am I testing? So if it does work, and that 1 times out of 8 that the subject line test, you do get a significant result, that you know why you got that result, and you can repeat it in the future and repeat that success. If you're just testing stuff and you don't know why one worked because you didn't have a hypothesis, you don't know what you're doing. So also keep in mind that subject lines can get cut off. So there on the mobile device on the left, you can see that there's only about, maybe 45 characters or so, especially on iPhone, before you don't get anything else. So you might want to consider front-loading your subject lines, putting keywords in the beginning if you have a high mobile open rate. Put the important stuff in the front because the rest of it's not going to be visible, right? And also be aware of your from name cutting off. So there's a funny example later that you'll see that's very association related as well. Also keep in mind acronyms. We all love our industry acronyms, right? But sometimes if someone's new to your industry, or there's an outsider, or maybe if you're marketing to a lot of like students in an industry, if you have a big student membership base, be really cognizant about using acronyms. And this really, really old example from Expedia at the bottom that's highlighted, the OW and the RT, is a great example of this. So this is, again, a really old example. I was like planning my honeymoon a while ago. And I saw this OW flights, and I'd been looking at overwater bungalows in like, you know, the Maldives and like Fiji and whatever. I didn't go there, keep in mind, that was way too expensive. But I got this email from Expedia, and I saw OW, and I thought, oh, overwater. And I'm like, wait, overwater flights? No, it's one way. Like, I would have never guessed that, right? Or the second example, like with Twitter so prevalent these days, what does RT mean? Retweet. I don't think Expedia is talking about retweeting. I think they meant round trip. So be really cognizant about using weird acronyms or industry-specific acronyms that your audience may or may not be aware of, or that have alternate meanings. It can be weird. So here is some, speaking of lots of copious amounts of subject line advice, here's some good or maybe not so good subject line advice. We have a whole infographic about it up on the Litmus site. I think if you Google Litmus subject line infographic, you can find it as well. But here's some like general rules of thumb. Don't be afraid to say free. If you have a free anything, again, I know we're not B2C, we're not selling anything, but you could have lots of free resources, that type of thing. Don't be afraid to say free. Unless you have a really serious deliverability issue already, subject line content filtering isn't really a concern anymore. Sometimes there's a little bit of evidence that shorter subject lines are better. I think that has a lot to do with mobile these days, right? Subject lines getting cut off. So it could be that shorter is better, or that front-loading strategy is really going to work well. Obviously be relevant, be useful and specific, and then test the crap out of those things.
Physically, how are you testing?
I have never tested 7 subject lines at once. I always do A/B tests. So your ESP should offer an A/B testing tool. If they don't, you can take your list, just split it straight in half, send one subject line, send one the other, and see how both do. So there's 2 different kinds of like major A/B tests, right? There's one where if your ESP has an A/B testing tool, they might do like a holdback, where you send each test to say like 15% of your list. They figure out who wins. It waits like 2 hours or however long. There's probably a set of time that you can set up, right? And then it sends the winner out to the rest. If you're looking for a really marked improvement and it's not like a time-sensitive thing where everyone has to get the email at once, you can do it that way. If you're looking for more just like institutional knowledge because you want to test some hypotheses, doing a straight A/B split. So 7 variations is probably a little aggressive. If you want to get really advanced, you could absolutely do an A, B, C, D, E, F, G test. But at that point, you also might just want to embrace, like, go whole hog and do like a multivariate or a Taguchi test, which is beyond the scope of what we can talk about today, though. Cool. Is that helpful? All right. And then also keep in mind about how the from name and the subject line work or don't work together. So again, I was at an event in Las Vegas. I stayed at the Aria. They sent me this email like a week after I stayed there. It's like, hey, please take this survey and share your views with us. But the from name says in big, bold caps, do not reply. So share your views with us, but do not reply. So keep in mind the mixed message that you could be sending if your from name and your subject line don't necessarily work together. All right, so the pre-header or preview text. Are any of you familiar with this concept? I see a few heads nodding. All right, cool. So if you're not, this is a screenshot of my Gmail inbox. I have the from name, the subject line, and then there in the box is this preview text. So that's interesting, right? It's an extra field that has many more characters than maybe my from name or my subject line does. And how do I control that? Well, it comes from the very top of your email, right? That preview text is going to pull the very first bit of text it finds in your email and puts it right in the inbox in a handful of email clients. It happens in Gmail, it happens in Outlook, it happens on iPhone, it happens on Android. So preview text is pretty prevalent these days. About 75% of inboxes are going to show it. Here's what it looks like in a mobile inbox. It actually takes up more room in a mobile inbox than your from name and your subject line combined. So 50% of your email space in the inbox is pre-header text. I'm emphasizing this because it's really important, right? There are so many horrible examples of pre-header text that I've seen out there, and there's no excuse for this being an underutilized space. Maybe? All right, so here's some good and bad examples. They're on the left. It says from On24, if you have trouble displaying this email, view it as a web page. So how many of you really, really want the word trouble associated with your brand name in the inbox? I don't. Email not displaying correctly, view online. So these are all really, really, really common things I see in pre-header text because guess what? They're like the default things that your ESPs put in the template so that you can view the email online. I'm not saying that the view online link isn't important because it is. It gives people that have really botched email experiences a better way to view it, but put it somewhere else in the email. Make better use of that space. So what can we do instead? Here's an email from Wistia. It says, scrappy beginnings. We all started somewhere. That's really cool, right? It's like a continuation of the subject line, and they have a really short subject line too. Or Sprout Social. They say webinar follow-up. Here are some next steps to get the most out of your webinar experience. Amazing. Meetup, to all Meetup organizers around the world. Thanks for all you do to create community. Your friends at Meetup. So they're like continuations. If your subject line's going to get cut off right away in the inbox, use that preview text to keep it running, to give someone a reason to open, to engage them, to intrigue them, to get them, again, to interact. And then also you can test pre-header text as well. Matt Bird, our email marketing manager, used to work at Wedding Wire. He did some A/B split tests on pre-header text while he was there and actually found that pre-header text can boost click-through rates by more than 30%. He also was able to get people to click on specific links in a newsletter by teasing them in the preview text. So if he had a really, really long newsletter with a link way at the bottom and he talked about it in the pre-header text, guess what article people started clicking on in that newsletter? The one at the very bottom. So if you're having issues with getting people to scroll and looking at the content at the bottom of your emails, give this a shot. It might work. You never know. And you can also hide pre-header text. We're a pretty big proponent of this. You don't always need that waste of space up there at the top being visible. This is a bit advanced, but you could literally just copy and paste this into your email, and I'm sure they're going to give you the slides afterwards so you can grab this bit of code. But what this does is it makes the text super tiny and hides it on most email clients, and so that it actually still shows up in the inbox, but doesn't show up in your actual email itself. I already told you that 75% of emails are usually displayed with preview text. So, because whenever you put big numbers on a slide, they become true. Here you go. And just to recap, so you've got from name, subject line, pre-header. There's character counts roughly. Again, since there's 3 different iPhone sizes now, this is for the iPhone 5 or 5S. You're going to have about 25 characters as your from name. Subject line is about 35. Pre-header is about 85. That obviously increases the bigger the screen size is, but I would say that keep this in mind as an absolute minimum. Is anyone catching the association mishap on this slide? I was waiting for some chuckles. So be really, really, really aware if you have association in your brand name, how that might cut off on mobile inboxes. It might sound slightly more inappropriate than you intend. You might become the interaction design ass instead of the interaction design association. You can also future-proof emails for the Apple Watch, right? So this piece of technology that might be coming out early this year in January or February, so we heard in early 2015. Supposedly the Apple Watch is going to grab your from name, your subject line, and your preview text and show it on people's wrists. Mind your way. Sort of. I can move over here for a while or sit down. Just keep that in mind. If you think that you're going to have a lot of people using this thing, optimizing those 3 fields can really help future-proof your campaigns. All right, so I've spent, a while talking about just the inbox. We haven't even opened your email yet. All that stuff you spent a lot of time and passion on creating. I haven't even gotten there yet. And I saw a lot of people taking a lot of notes, so that's good. So yay, you convinced your subscriber to open. And then they did, and then they see nothing. So image blocking is something that plagues a lot of email clients. I'm going to guess that a lot of you have a lot of Outlook subscribers. Outlook blocks images by default. So if you use a very heavily image-based email, like if you have a print publication, if you're sending a print newsletter to your association members, and then handing that print publication to your design team and saying, hey, can you send this in an email too, or a part of it in an email, and they're just exporting a JPEG and slapping it in a template and sending it out, JPEGs don't show up in Outlook right away, right? People have to right-click to download images. The same thing happens in a lot of mobile email apps as well. So you can kind of get around this with using some tools like alt text. You could also just use more text in your emails and not rely so heavily on images, especially if that's going to be a big component of your email. So here's an example of alt text, or at least styled alt text. So you can see the Litmus logo. This is what it would look like with images off. We use a lot of heavy, like plain text in our emails. So it's styled text. You can make it different colors and different weights and even different fonts. There's a limited set of fonts that are kind of web safe that work everywhere. But you can include a lot of text in your emails. So when images are off, they still look really good and are readable and actionable. But logos are kind of hard to replicate in text. So our logo is blocked in this particular example. And you can't really tell what's supposed to be there. It actually says Litmus and it's blue. But since it's on a black background, it's really hard to see. So you can use something called styled alt text to make the alternative text on your images different colors, different sizes, even different fonts. So that turns into this, which is way more readable, right? It's bigger, it's white. I can see that maybe that was the Litmus logo that was supposed to be right there. And again, maybe a little bit advanced, and you can jot this down, try to really quickly, or you'll get the slides later. This is really simple to do. So on any of your image tags, you can also include that alternative text. You can also style that alternative text to make it look differently in the inbox. We also have a couple of really extensive guides to both styled alt text and to image blocking. So those are bit.ly/styled alt and bit.ly/image-block. Great. All right. So images aren't blocked anymore. I've either turned them on or I'm using a client that doesn't block them anymore. So how many of you really, really like to cram as much information that you can above the fold? All right, cool. Thank you for admitting. We'll have therapy later. So the fold, we can debate this all day long about whether or not it's still important or whether or not it exists. So if, again, I'm old school, I actually have like a print design background. I actually laid out my college's newspapers and I got them printed on a full Heidelberg press. So I'm old. And so above the fold comes from an old newspaper term. Newspapers sit in a newsstand, and literally the content above the literal fold of the newspaper was what got newspapers to sell. So that's where that term comes from. And so it's really anything below where that point where people are going to scroll and see. And really, the truth is people scroll. There's a lot of evidence that people do scroll these days. So don't be so concerned with cramming everything above the fold or about the preview pane. The other thing is that preview panes are lots of different sizes these days, right? You've got tablets. You've got people that are on those teeny tiny little airplane travel friendly laptops. Then you've got people like me that sit at my office with a 27-inch display. And my preview pane's going to be huge then, right? But do be aware that you can also have some unintended consequences in the design and the layout of and this is a really old example, but it's still funny nonetheless, because I think when Bloomingdale's was sending out this email, they intended to have a home sale, not a wholesale. So again, don't be too worried about cramming a bunch of stuff up in there, but do worry about sometimes what might happen if you don't think about it. So don't forget about it entirely, but do be aware. And then also be aware that mobile inboxes kind of have a preview pane too, right? So in that first view, this is from I think Gilt, they have really, really, really long subject lines. And as a consequence, the actual content of their email gets pushed way down in the mobile inbox. So again, just something to be aware of. And so more waxing enthusiastic or less than enthusiastic about the fold. Matt, our email marketing manager, says, does your iPhone fold? Because mine surely doesn't. I would break the screen. I guess they bend now, but they don't fold. And then Joshua Porter, who used to lead up design at HubSpot back in Boston, wrote a really amazing blog post that talks about the implications that scrolling is actually easier than clicking. And so, like, here's my mobile device, right? I was on the metro this morning, which was awful, by the way. I don't know how many of you live here, but like it took forever to get here. It just kept stopping. And even though like I didn't have a signal, I had like some saved like articles on my phone. And so just to kill the time, I sat on the metro going like this. What was I doing? Scrolling. This is a mindless activity. I can do this all day long, right? But what actually gets me to stop and click? It's got to be pretty interesting, right? So scrolling is actually way easier than clicking. You actually have to like intensively, like you have to intend to create friction to get someone to say like, oh, that's interesting, right? So keep in mind that scrolling is actually not is like this awful thing that we sometimes make it out to be, that people aren't as lazy, that actually scrolling can be the more lazy behavior, and that clicking is the one that requires a little bit more motivation. So make people want to click. Don't worry about getting them to scroll. And speaking of clicking, again, all kinds of best practices abound about what you should do to make your call to actions really, really click-worthy. So when I say you want to create friction, but you also want to minimize it at the same time. So you want to create enough interest and a little bit of friction to get them to stop and want to click. But when it comes to actually clicking the call to action itself, think about things like commitment level. Am I asking people to commit too much at the call to action? So like in a retailer's case, saying buy now versus shop now, 9 times out of 10, shop now is going to get more clicks than buy now because it's a lower commitment call to action. We've confirmed this at Litmus. We've tested like a read more or a learn more versus a start testing now kind of call to action. And guess what? The lower commitment wins every time. You want to do things like test buttons versus text. Be really clear and concise, and don't mislead your users, right? I have an example later that shows how a call to action that says one thing, but then your landing page says another can be a really disorienting and kind of horrible experience. And then also don't do what this Costco email does in this mobile view on the right, where you have like 15 calls of action in one view, because I don't know where to click there. So here's a couple examples. On the left there, that's a Litmus email. Notice that there's no image, but guess what? I can still see the call to action. We've used what's called a bulletproof button. If you're saving out your images, like in Photoshop, and sticking them in your emails and images are blocked, I can't see your calls to action. I can't click on what you're asking me to click. So use text and just color-based buttons. We call them bulletproof in the industry because they're bulletproof. They work in any circumstance. What they are is basically like a table cell that has a background color and a text link, and you just style the color of the text link to make it look like a button. You can even do fancy things like put rounded corners on them or gradients in the background if you want to get really advanced. Again, there's a full detailed article about different ways that you can approach this at bit.ly/bulletproof-buttons. But you want them to be big, bold, easy to click, low commitment, right? Test the crap out of these things. In the case of an iPhone, I want my big finger to be able to get in there and click it really, really well. And here's some bulletproof button code that you'll find over on that blog post as well, that has the rounded corners and the whole shebang. So try those out when you get home. All right, last but not least, the email is the invitation. The website is the party, right? We don't send emails because emails do a lot of good for our business for the most part, right? We're typically trying to send people to a landing page or somewhere on our site. And so there's a lot of mistakes that we can make here. And if you put all of this tender loving care into creating a great email up until this point, and then the payoff just utterly falls flat on the landing page, then we're not doing ourselves or our company any favors, or whoever manages the website, because sometimes it's you, sometimes it's somebody else, right? So here's a couple examples. One's more B2B, one's more B2C. Victoria's Secret sent me an email. I put some stuff in my cart. I go to checkout. The checkout page shows me this little pop-up. It's like, hey, add this makeup kit, only $32. I don't want the makeup kit. I use different makeup. Every time I zoom in to try to get that little interstitial thing, that little pop-up to go away, the X in the corner goes off the side of my screen. Huh. What in the world, right? So don't put pop-up users to mobile users, right? Don't do that. Or in this case, I want to register for this webinar, or this white paper, whatever this is from this company. All those tiny little form fields, you know how big my finger is? It's going to not fit into those form boxes, right? So don't do that. Instead, look at how much better these are compared to the other ones. Give it some breathing room, right? Especially on mobile. And on the case of desktop, so this is a really, really, really old example. I love marketing profs, and I hate to pick on them, but this is, again, a really good example. So this is the email. It says download now in the email. This email marketing fact book, really cool. I really want to download this. It sounds amazing. Here's the web page. Where is it? Oh, it's there. But what? $99? Add to cart? Didn't the email say download now? That's not download now. That's add to cart. So be really aware if you're just setting the wrong expectations, if you're lying to your email subscribers. Again, I love marketing profs. I love Ann Handley. She writes really great books. But this is not cool, right? I don't think they do this anymore, by the way. Like I said, this example is probably like 7 years old at this point. But don't do this, right? Don't lie in your email. Don't set up the wrong expectations just to get people to click. And then also, don't forget about your text version. We just posted a really long blog post about all the horrible ways that people botch their plain text versions. There's all kinds of really bad examples on there if you're looking for what not to do. Go check out the Litmus blog. But basically, don't forget about these, right? So spend 5 minutes, make them look okay. Use hierarchy with symbols, right? I use my equal sign as my favorite, right? It kind of sets things off, makes things look like headlines. Or I'll use like dashes, or I'll use all caps. I don't like all caps, but it works really well in text emails because you don't have any other way to create hierarchy. You can't make things bold, right? Also, most ESPs will like automatically convert your HTML to a text version. And what will happen is if you're writing copy really well and including hyperlinks in the middle of copy to create context, right? So if you're saying like, according to a survey done by yada, 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 the survey is linked in context in the HTML version, guess what? In the text version, in the middle of that sentence, you're going to get a link, which to a plain text email reader, a link in the middle of a sentence doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So reword those things, put the link on the next line. So just do a little bit of reformatting and think about how to embrace the few users that might be actually reading your emails this way. And also, it's going to get really important, again, with probably things like the Apple Watch. All right. So you guys have been really quiet. We're a small group. Take a few minutes and tell me why some of these suck. Anyone want to throw something out? Thank you. Yeah. So that's a really good example of one of those like things that an adult purchase to like the Old Navy brand team probably means a purchase from the adult department. But to adults, an adult purchase might mean something else, right? What else do you see here? All right. What about BR store event? What's a BR store? It is, but sadly. Yeah, right. Sadly. Thank you very much, Lisa. Or introducing our January 2014 release if you have trouble reading this email. Or what's wrong with this eye contact email there on the bottom right? Which of the W's is that missing? Yeah, what do they want me to do? Read the email? How are they measuring success on that? They probably can't because there's nothing to click. So, all right. Good catch on the adult purchase. It's like one of my, this one's probably like 8 years old, but it never gets old. All right, cool. So let's take a few minutes and talk about the stuff under the hood, right? HTML is not the most enticing thing in the universe, but it is really, really, really important when it comes to email because support for HTML is either great or horrible in the email world. Email is not a website, right? If you have your web team writing emails or you've hired a freelancer that primarily specializes in web to do your emails, they're probably thinking, oh yeah, no big deal. I spill my tea. I'll just make a one-page website and that'll work in email. It won't. Email is a unique medium with unique considerations, right? It totally has its own set of rules that it plays by. It's not a JPEG or print ad, not a one-page website. So you have to kind of code like it's 1999, right? I can sit down. And think in modules, right? So whenever you're, basically, if you think of HTML tables, think about the tables that you know, which are probably the tables in Excel, right? You've got columns and rows. That's exactly how HTML tables work. So think about every cell, which is what you're creating when you're creating HTML tables. Every cell is like a little container for either images or text. So put text in one container, image in the next. Don't try to combine the two. Think of it in that sort of modular approach. It's also going to help you if you're doing like a lot of copying and pasting from other emails, or if like you need to add or remove a section really easily. Taking a like modular approach to how you set up your HTML can make that kind of thing a lot easier. So the other thing you're going to do is avoid CSS. And I don't mean avoid CSS like entirely, but avoid the kind of CSS that you would use on the web. So you can't use a linked style sheet in the header because Gmail is going to strip it out. But supposedly they're working on that. Don't keep your fingers too crossed, but hopefully they're working on that. You definitely cannot use CSS for positioning or layout. So if you're using floats, clears, if you're doing anything that helps set up the look and feel of the email with CSS in terms of layout, that's not going to be supported primarily in Outlook. You can use inline CSS to do things like change font colors and font sizes, but it has to be used inline. And again, it can't be used for layout or positioning. And the concepts of progressive enhancement and graceful degradation become really important here. And what that means, progressive enhancement basically means I'm going to design or code for the lowest common denominator, which is usually going to be Outlook and Gmail. They have the worst support. And I can progressively enhance it. So if I have someone using Apple Mail, so if I have Mac users that have like Outlook for Mac or Apple Mail, or if I have a lot of people on iOS, iPhone and iPad, I can put in little bells and whistles. For instance, Bulletproof Buttons with the rounded corners. The rounded corners are a progressive enhancement. The roundedness on the sides are controlled by CSS that's not supported in Outlook. But you know what? Is the Outlook user going to really miss out on the fact that their buttons don't have rounded corners? Probably not, but it's a nice touch for the people that are on maybe iOS that can see them. So that's progressive enhancement. And graceful degradation means that I use something fancy, but it's going to gracefully degrade. So it's not going to look completely borked and broken to the person whose email client doesn't support that fancy thing, right? So you have to have fallbacks and things that are going to fall into place when those kinds of things don't work. And also, you can't use JavaScript. So don't think you can put your Google Analytics tracker code in your email and have that work, right? Flash, which, God, I hope none of you are using Flash anymore. You also can't do things like surveys or forms. Despite whatever fancy tool your ESP or your mailing service provider might have that allows you to put surveys and forms in email, they're not well supported. The support doesn't come from your ESP. It comes from the place where the subscriber is opening it. So like Outlook 2007, for instance, will take a checkbox and turns it into two brackets, completely disables the form. Or a client like Outlook, like Yahoo Mail, if someone's opening in a web browser in Yahoo Mail, the survey looks like it works. You can click a button and then press submit, but then you're going to get a warning and then nothing happens. So it's just a really horrible user experience. And also web standards don't apply. If someone says oh, my code validates, doesn't matter. I already talked about using inline CSS. Things like background images, I think most everyone knows now that they're not supported in Outlook 2007. And the reason why Outlook is such an evil thing to HTML code is because Outlook 2007, 2010, and 2013 all uses Word to render. So basically Microsoft took a word processing engine and decided to let it interpret HTML and display it in an email client. And that's why that's so horrible. The older versions use Internet Explorer to render, which is actually a web browser, and it's supposed to do things like interpret HTML. And also keep in mind that even if you do have someone on Gmail or Yahoo or something, that web browsers can even produce different results. So if you have someone looking at Gmail and Internet Explorer and someone looking at Gmail and Chrome, they can see different things as well. All right. And it probably goes without saying after all that and the fact that I work at Litmus that there's lots and lots and lots of different email apps and programs. It's really important to test. That's one of the core competencies of what Litmus does, right? You send us a test of your email. We take screenshots of what it looks like in all those places so you can tell if it's borked or broken. So be sure, if you're not using Litmus, test manually, set up test accounts, do whatever it takes to have an idea of what your subscribers are seeing when they open your email. Because otherwise, it could be really ugly. Things could not work. All of your really carefully crafted calls to action could be completely invisible. Who knows? So you don't know unless you test. All right, the mobile factor. I already talked earlier about how this is happening, right? 400% growth since 2011. That's a lot. And so Blue Hornet, I think they're actually sponsoring this conference, aren't they? Cool. They do a study every year, and they ask people, if you get a mobile email that doesn't look good, what do you do? The options are delete it, unsubscribe, view on a computer, I don't know, or I read it anyway. 80% of people say that they delete emails that don't look good on mobile devices. But 30% say they unsubscribe. That's it. You don't ever get to email them again. Your email looks like shit on mobile, unsubscribe. That's pretty drastic, right? But here's what's even crazier, is that those numbers have increased a lot from the last time I did this study. The people that said delete it, it's 15% more. But the people that said unsubscribe, it's a 68% increase year over year. So what is this telling me? It's telling me that mobile subscribers are getting less and less tolerant of these crappy experiences, right? They're just moving on. They're not even giving you a second chance. A couple years ago, Litmus did a quick analysis where we saw, we asked ourselves a question. People get an email on a mobile device, how often do they go back and look at that same email in like a second environment, like either on webmail or desktop? And there's only like 3% of emails, or 3% of the time. So people don't save it for later. They don't say, oh, this looks like crap here, I'm going to go read it somewhere else. Or they very, very rarely do that. So don't count on them giving you a second chance. There's also this very surprising statistic that that 31% of marketers don't know their mobile email open rate. So do you know your mobile email open rate? Raise your hand if you do. One person. That's lower than 31%. So no excuses. This is really easy to find out. So go find it out. Know thy audience. It's like written on the marble slabs of the email marketer's commandments, right? Know thy audience. Go figure it out. Again, excuse the shameless plug, but Litmus can do this really, really easily for you. You copy this little bit of HTML, you put it in your email, you send it out, you get stats back that say 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 70% of your audience is viewing on mobile. I've seen 70%. It happens. Matt Myron, in fact, has 70% of their opens on mobile. So this just goes to show that you can't read a study, right? Don't rely on benchmarks. Don't read every study and assume that applies to your audience. Because we publish a thing that says, hey, on average, 50% of people open on mobile. But guess what? 70% of Matt Myron's customers open on mobile, but only 15% of ours do. Most of our subscribers are reading on desktop. We're not average. Our audience is different. Yours probably is too. So here's some things that you definitely need to keep in mind. If you look at your mobile open rate and you decide that it's something that you need to care about, sometimes you might say it's not something I need to care about. It might be better use of your time and resources to do something else. But if you do decide that mobile is something that your organization needs to care about, keep in mind that the finger is the new mouse, right? So just like scrolling, I'm using my finger. I'm also clicking with my finger. So I'm now tapping. I'm not clicking anymore. Clicking is now tapping. Finger is the new mouse. Whatever catchy thing you want to try to remember to ingrain that in your brain. Mice have very precise clicking power. You can click the tiniest little link in like a group of links. But your finger, if there's 10 links all in a row and I hit it and I hit the wrong one, how many of you done that? It's maddening, right? Do you just give up? I've done that seriously 3 times where I try to click one link, or you're zooming way in, and then you're I have kind of long nails, and so I can't. Ugh, so annoying. So bigger is better because of that same rule, right? So here's some rules of thumb that I use when I'm thinking about my copy. Body copy needs to be at least 16 pixels. Headlines, at least 22. Buttons, so Apple, iOS did this study where they said, how big are the tips of people's fingers? Apparently, the tips of our fingers are 44 by 44 pixels. Who knew? But that's actually kind of small, right? So think of that as like an absolute minimum. Also, white space is really important, right? There's like link clusters that I was talking about earlier where like you're trying to hit the thing and it's not working. So white space becomes really important too so that people don't get frustrated by mistaps. 10 pixels isn't a lot. That's, again, an absolute minimum. And so all of these rules are here because it's your job to create touch targets. If you've gotten someone past the from name, the subject line, enticed them with pre-header text, gotten them to open, gotten them to stop scrolling, and they want to click, don't put any other barriers in their way. So here's a really great example of some really horrible things that can happen. Again, old email, Expedia has redesigned their stuff and it's way better since then. But if you take a look at the navigation in this email, you can see that it's broken, right? The S's for each of their navigational elements are like on the second line. The little stale tag is a little like busted. It's because iOS, iPhone and iPad automatically resizes fonts that are less than 13 pixels. iOS is doing you a favor. It's saying, this text is so small that whoever's holding me can't read it. So I'm going to resize it for you and make it readable. So you can disable this. That's what that little bit of like text on the screen is, a hint. But before you go and put this everywhere in your email and continue using 11-pixel font in your mobile emails, consider that maybe the iOS is doing that for a reason, right? It's doing you a favor. But in the case that you've got like disclaimer copy or some other case where like it is important that text is smaller than 13 pixels, you can use that to prevent that from happening. I already talked about making things really big, but again, if you want like a funny little quip that you can remember, like Justine said all these stupid funny things at HighRoad Solutions Conference, I like big buttons and I cannot lie. So I'm going to create like a little Sir Mix-a-Lot throwback rap that I just talk about how much I like big buttons in email. So every time you're creating a call to action, say, Justine likes big buttons, I'm going to put a big button in this email. So there you go. So basically the rule of thumb here is enlarge all the things, right? You can have an internet meme as well, or just print this off and put it on your desk. So aside from iOS trying to make all your fonts bigger, it also tries to help you do a lot of other stuff. It tries to help you make phone calls and track packages and find addresses and create events. So if you ever notice that you're like text messaging someone or an email and like tonight is underlined or like a date is underlined, what that's doing is the operating system is saying, oh, hey, like there's something that I might be able to help the user do here, like create a calendar event or map an address. Those are all really great, helpful features of iOS, but they also create like branding and usability disasters, right? So there on the right-hand side is, in that blue like bar, is what ended up being blue text and a blue background. And that's really important for this hotel chain's email. It's like the dates that the sale is valid for, but it's pretty much unreadable. So iOS is going to turn a lot of these links in your email blue, whether you like it or not. There's no universal way to just turn this off. It's kind of like a hunting maneuver where you have to go into your email and you'll eventually learn what kind of text will trigger those things and proactively go and fix them. But you can go into your email and wrap each of those indications in a span and tell it to be a different color if you want. And bit.ly /blue-links is a really lengthy explanation of the pros and cons of doing that. So the goal here isn't to disable the link. We still want the link to work. We just want it to be readable. And so in this case, for the email on the right, I would just make those white instead of blue, but leave them underlined and leave the link intact. Also contrast. So it's a little early, but I bet later today a lot of your phones are going to be like kind of dead or like on the verge of dying. And one of the best ways to conserve your battery screen is to turn the battery down or to turn the brightness down, right? Bright batteries or bright screens kind of kill batteries. And so also keep in mind that you're not the only person that does that. Your subscribers probably do it too. And emails that have really low contrast, so like this one here with like the gray text and the gray background at the bottom of that email right there, think about if the contrast was really low on that email. It'd be completely unreadable. So using high contrast can help low contrast screens be more readable too. So how many of you have heard of responsive email? I know it was already mentioned once this morning. I get a lot of questions at events like this. People say, hey, can I give me that line of code that makes emails responsive? It's a media query, right? And responsive design is really powerful, but it is so much more than a line of code. Yes, it does include something called a media query, but I think that the singular notion of how we refer to them as a media query has set an improper expectation that it's this really simple line of code that I put in my email to make it responsive. So what a responsive email really is more like a set of conditional statements. If you're familiar with an if-else loop or any sort of programming language that does that kind of thing, basically what a responsive design is doing and that media query is doing is saying, if this email is viewed on a screen size smaller than whatever you want, 600 pixels, then do this. And so what you're doing, so say that you've got a really simple email and you've got a header, body, button, and footer. You could put the header, and you can name it, it's called a class. You could name it the class header, and then the media query says, all right, header, on screen sizes smaller than 600 pixels, I want you to become scalable. I want you to grow with the size of the screen. So rather than being a fixed width, I want you to scale. And then you can say, all right, body, on screen sizes smaller than 600 pixels, I want you to go from 13 pixels to 16 pixels. So you literally have to name sections of your email and write instructions that tell the email what to do. You can make this as simple or as complex as you want. You could apply that, like font resizing one is probably one of the simpler ones to do. You can apply that to your entire email, right? You can reuse classes, right? So you can say body copy, body copy, body copy, body copy. There's one rule at the top that tells all your body copy to be bigger. But you can also make it really complex. You can have each section, you could have every sentence have a different media query. And you can do really crazy things like hide content or change the layout too with media queries. So it's really powerful, but it's not a silver bullet, right? It's also not supported everywhere. Gmail is a really good example. Remember how earlier I said that Gmail strips CSS from the head of your email? Guess where media queries are? They are CSS in the head of your email. So Gmail is going to strip out your media query. So responsive email will not work in the Gmail app on iPhone and Android. Again, they're working on it. Maybe in 2020, we'll see that happen. Another really common misconception is that responsive design will detect device. They say, oh, I want to target iPhones. It's not how it works. It targets screen size. And now that there's 3 different sizes of iPhones, there's a whole blog post again on the Litmus site that tells you how to target the different iPhone sizes, by the way. All right. So here's a really cool example of what you can do with responsive email from Twitter. If you look carefully, or just shout out, what's different? That little blue banner at the top switches sides. The image goes from being on the right-hand side to being above. But look at the button. The call to action is different. It's different on the mobile device than it is on the website, right? Or on the desktop. So this is probably one of the more advanced examples of what you can do with responsive design. But there's really, really powerful, some really cool stuff you can do there. All right, and if you take nothing away today, then definitely take this. Is that this is just a few of the different ways that people can read your email, right? And we talk a lot about platforms and like devices. We talk in broad strokes, right? We say Windows and Mac, or we say Android and iPhone. But those things are important because it helps us know our audience. But what determines rendering, what determines media query support, what determines a lot of stuff is the actual app or the program or the email client that someone's reading on. So Android, for example, has 2 main email clients. One is Gmail, one is just called email. Gmail is not going to support your media queries. Email is. So if someone says, hey, your email looks like crap on Android, that's the most unhelpful statement in the universe. If they say, my email looks like crap in Gmail on Android, that's way more helpful. This happens all the time at Litmus. People will write in and say, my Android doesn't match the screenshots in your Android. And I say, well, what app are you using? Oh, well, I'm using some app I've never heard of. Well, your screenshots in Gmail, right? So definitely something to keep in mind. It's the app that determines rendering, not the device. Here's an example, right? Those 2 Android phones. Same phone, same email. Looks pretty different, right? Again, here's same email, 2 different devices, but 3 different apps. email app on the phone, and then 2 different Android apps. All right, so we're going to plan your next great email, or talk about some emails that you sent me. I talked about this who, what, when, where, why thing. There's actually a brief. I think earlier when she asked how many people like planned or like had a strategy for all the emails they send, and like 2 people raised their hands, download this brief sheet and start using it right away. It's going to cover the 5 W's, your audience, your objective, your goal. It's going to ask you about testing, and then it's going to help you plan on all this stuff, right? It's going to help you create really great emails. All right, so that's how to get a hold of me. And I think we have, maybe 15 or 20 minutes? So we're going to do a little bit of critiquing. Are the people that submitted their emails here in the room, by chance? All right. Oh, really? Let's see here. I'm going to need to turn on mirroring. Hold on just a second. Bear with me while I figure out how to do this. All right. Is anyone in the room, is this their email? No? Well, let's critique it anyway. Maybe they're online. So, what do we like about this email? What do we don't like? Based upon what we learned today, how would you change this or maybe make it better? Don't be shy. Do we like the button? Is it a big button? Can we not lie? All right. Ooh, so I can tell if buttons are bulletproof. See how I can highlight the text there? If I couldn't highlight the text, it would be an image. That's a bulletproof button. Nice job, AAN Fall Conference. Oh, the American Academy of Neurology. Nice job, guys. I also like this big, bold headline. I like how the text in this kind of just makes like a nice like synergy there between the 2 different colors. This is also a fun thing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's not responsive. That's all right. But this is nice and big, right? Even if, and this is what I would say maybe is a mobile-first approach. And what a mobile-first approach is, you don't have to use responsive email to make emails look good on mobile, right? What you can do is you can do things like this. So this email is on a desktop, right? It's even like, the resolution is really low right now because I'm like going on a projector. So the fact that the text is really big and readable and that there's a lot of like room around that button, but it's not responsive, I would say this is a mobile first email or a scalable email. Because even if this email does get like shrunk down on my mobile device's screen, it's still going to be readable because that big text is going to shrink down to be just slightly less big. The button's still going to be really touchable and friendly and that kind of thing. So I would say that overall, this is a nice email. I like the use of bullets. It's not just like a wall of text. It's pretty focused. I can tell that they want me to register for this conference. I can tell what their goal was here. It's pretty straightforward. It's probably easy for them to see if this email has been successful. And the bullets kind of help me break up everything and make it a little bit more readable, scannable. I even see that they're using pre-header text, which is great. I bet you this was hidden. Right, that's why that looks kind of weird. And up there, they probably were hiding this, and it just got kind of weird in the... Oh, wait. Oh, it's a PDF. That's why. All right, cool. How about ISA training? Are you here? All right, maybe you're online. What do we think about this email? Again, don't be shy. Too long. I agree. Too many choices. I heard of Jesus. All right. What is one thing you would do to improve this email? I heard too long, too many choices. It should be a website. That's actually not bad advice. Sometimes emails try too hard to be websites, right? So if this email is... Usually if people are here in the room, I'll ask them what the purpose of emails are so that we can help improve and settle in like on their goal. If I had to guess, I would say that the purpose of this email is to communicate upcoming events and to get them to register. If that's the case, I completely agree with your comment that it should be a website, right? This should have a high-level overview of the benefits of attending this association's events and link off to a place where they can read more or find an event that's relative to them. Another thing I might do in this case is do some segmentation. So if you've heard of our email design conference, we just did one in Boston this year, but last year we did 3 in Boston, London, and San Francisco. So rather than just doing like a spray and pray on our whole list and saying like, we'll pick the event like closest to you, we actually used geolocation. We found out where people were the last time they opened an email from us. If they were on anywhere on the West Coast, we sent them the San Francisco event. If they were anywhere on the East Coast, we sent them the Boston one. And if they were anywhere in the UK or Europe, we sent them the London one. Everyone else got just an email that had all 3 events in it. We actually found that the email that had like the segmented approach based on geolocation had a 60% open rate. The other email, the general one, had like a 30% open rate. So if maybe this person knows where these people live, if not, you could use something like geolocation, tell them the events that are closest to them. We've also got a lot of like instrumentation maintenance, industrial communications, cybersecurity. Maybe I know something about my audience that can tell me what's more relevant to them. I'm going to guess that all of these subjects aren't relevant to everyone this email is being sent to. There's a lot of ways that I can make this less overwhelming to the reader. I would also definitely recommend testing some buttons. I don't see a single button anywhere in here, right? It's all text links, and every call to action is exactly the same. Register or learn more. So here's a good opportunity to test buttons versus text, and maybe even high commitment or low commitment. I've never seen mixed commitment, which is what I would consider to be right here. Register or learn more, right? It's sort of very high commitment and also very low commitment. Maybe that works. But maybe just doing one or the other would work better. Cool. All right. Are these people in the room? None of you just want to admit it now, right? It's all right. I do this at our conference, and people love it, but they're also like, So if you've ever been to our conference or heard about I earned the nickname Judge Jordan by doing this, by the way. So one of the things I like to pick on is social sharing icons in email, because a lot of times they're presented without context. They're just like a series of like icons that mean nothing. So this is an improvement upon that, right? Because usually if we got rid of the follow this part, if this just wasn't there and it was just a Facebook icon and a Twitter icon, I would ask you, what are those icons doing? If I click on that, am I going to share this on my network? Am I going to follow you? Am I going to tweet something? And so I like that they set it up and they say, like, just follow us. Like, I'm making you aware that I have a social media presence, right? So there's a purpose behind those buttons right there. So definitely, I don't know if there's hidden pre-header text here. Maybe not, but this is what's going to show up in my inbox through this email online or in your mobile browser. Let's put something more useful there. This is also a very, very, very deep header. I know I said that we need to embrace the scroll. The fold is dead, whatever we want to say. But that's a very deep header. I might try to shorten that up a little bit and get the context more up top. In this issue, so this is tricky. These anchor links actually don't work in a lot of email clients. So a lot of times if you click them, nothing will happen. They won't go anywhere. It's also a questionable use of space, right? This is really like valuable real estate kind of in the top of the email here. If you're trying to get people to scroll, I would try that pre-header trick, right? Where you tease maybe one of the like articles in the bottom, like up here. First name personalization, sometimes it works great. Sometimes it really comes back to bite you. Make sure you have a fallback in place. Make sure you're not saying dear null or dear name not found or anything like that, because that's one of the best ways that first name personalization can fail. Some audiences respond really, really well to it, and others, it just doesn't matter, and it becomes more trouble than it's worth, because when it fails hard. This is another case where I would definitely suggest try using buttons. And try using different calls to action. Like this is actually really nice. Send an email to your representatives and senders. I really, really like that as a subject line or as a call to action. It's telling me exactly what you want me to do. It's being really clear and upfront. I'm hoping that if I click this, it takes me to a site that like I fill in a form and it does that for me. Maybe I need to log in. Or maybe I need to click take action. All right. So I can finally send that message. But I might link directly to this site or this page instead of this one, right? You want to reduce the number of clicks it takes to get to the final destination. Again, I would say maybe using a button here, testing some different calls to action. And maybe shortening up the overall copy in there. Some suggestions. All right, how about the American Dental Association? Are you here? Not yet. That's all right. What do we think about this email? Ooh, it's responsive. Fancy. So in this case, it's a pretty simple one. It looks like we don't have any like crazy layout changes or that kind of thing happening. It looks like it's literally just changing the overall size of the email when it hits a certain size. So here's an example of maybe what I wouldn't do with those social icons. Like, what do those do if I click those? Something. I also don't see any pre-header text. So I might suggest giving that a try. And I also don't see any calls to action. It's a very like contextually link-heavy email, which might work depending on the goal. I don't know what the goal is again. But in this case, like, is this just informational? Like, do I want people to read this review? If that's the case, maybe I put a button here that says, like, read the report or whatever this is. Yeah, it's a PDF. So let's try that maybe, an actual call to action there. Ooh, you're right. I don't see one. So it could be that that gets added by the ESP at the time of send. It looks like this is just on their site and not like an actual like copy of an email. So that could be that might be a good point why the pre-header is missing. It could be that like the ESP sometimes will append like headers and footers. But I would say, yeah, for sure. You to be at least CAN spam compliant in the US, you're going to need to have an unsubscribe link in your physical mailing address at an absolute minimum. CASL, the Canadian spam law, although it's the American Dental Association, so Canada part doesn't apply. All right. Where's Suzanne? How much time do we have? Do we need to get wrapped up? All right. I'm going to finish up the sort of live review thing. If you have an email that you want to review, come and grab me. I'm always happy to personally give you some advice. But are there any other questions? You've been a very quiet group. Did you learn a lot? All right, good. What are you going to go home and do next? I'll ask you a question. What's the number one thing you're going to go home and do? What did you write down? I want you to have a literal takeaway. Commit to yourself right now. You're going to go home and try something. Yes.
Bulletproof buttons.
Woo!
Give it up. Bulletproof buttons.
Woo!
Woo!
Yeah. There we go. Are they going to be big bulletproof buttons? All right, good.
Anybody else? No? All right.
Preview text, definitely. We don't do much with that, and I like the idea of testing it as well.
Yeah, let me know if you find anything cool. We'll blog about you.
All right.
All right, thanks, guys.